The ideal conflict. Mr. Dayakrishna Mehta was walking on air. His long-cherished dream had come true. He had attained the position of power and authority that was like a paradise for Indians. The Viceroy had appointed him as a member of the Executive Council. Friends were congratulating him. Celebrations were being held everywhere. There were banquets in his honor, and letters of assurance were being given. His appointment was seen not just as a personal honor but as a national one. Even the British officials were treating him with great respect. Mr. Dayakrishna was a renowned barrister from Lucknow. He was known for his broad-mindedness, political acumen, and dedication to the public. He was always engrossed in public service. There was no one in the entire country who could match his fearless search for truth, his impartial criticism, or his deep empathy for the people. The newspapers were full of commentary on his appointment. Some voices criticized the government for this decision, while others hailed it as a testament to the government's liberalism and concern for the people. There was also a third group that quietly lamented that another pillar of the nation had fallen. It was evening. A party was being held in Seza Park by the Liberals in honor of Mr. Mehta. Notable figures from across the province were gathered there. After the meal, the chairman, in his speech, expressed confidence that Mr. Mehta's entry into power would be beneficial to the people, and that, through his efforts, those policies hindering the nation's progress would be amended. In his response, Mr. Mehta said, "The laws of a nation are bound by its present circumstances. Until those circumstances change, hoping for a reform in the laws is an illusion." The meeting ended. One group praised the political acumen and fairness of Mr. Mehta's statements, another said he had fallen into a trap, and a third group, full of despair, merely shook their heads but said nothing. Mr. Dayakrishna had been in Delhi for a month. It was the month of Falgun, February to March. Evening was setting in. He was sitting by a pond in his garden on a velvet easy chair. Mrs. Rajeshwari Mehta was sitting in front, learning to play the piano, while Miss Manorama was feeding biscuit crumbs to the fish in the pond. Suddenly, she asked her father, "Who were the gentlemen who just left?" "Mehta, they were members of the council's military committee." "Manorama, are they second only to the Viceroy?" "Mehta, everyone is second to the Viceroy. They all receive the same salary, but no one matches their competence." "Rajeshwari, did you notice how courteous and humble the English people are?" "Rajeshwari, I consider them the epitome of politeness. They surpass us even in this virtue. Their wives greeted me with so much affection." "Manorama, I felt like falling at their feet." "Mehta, I have never seen such generous, courteous, sincere, and appreciative people. Our compassion and righteousness are mere words. It pains me to think that I harbored so much suspicion towards them until now. Usually, the grievances we have against them are due to a lack of mutual understanding. We are not familiar with each other's nature and disposition. Rajeshwari, there is a great need for a union club where people of both communities can enjoy each other's company. This is the only way to dispel the baseless animosity." "Mehta, I think the same." Looking at his watch, it's 7 o'clock, time for the meeting of the business committee. The situation of the Indians is strange. They believe that once an Indian member enters the council, he becomes the master of India and can do whatever he pleases. They expect him to overturn the existing policies, create a new heaven and a new sun. They don't consider the limitations within which the members have to work. "Rajeshwari, it's not their fault. It's human nature to have high expectations from one's own. Now, half of the council members are Indians. Can't their opinions influence government policy?" "Mehta, of course, they can, and they are. But the policy itself cannot be changed. Even if all the members were Indian, they could not inaugurate a new policy. They cannot forget that their presence in the council is entirely dependent on the government's favor and trust. Moreover, once inside, they realize the internal situation, and most of the public's doubts seem unfounded. With the position comes the heavy burden of responsibility. It's natural to worry that a new policy might yield undesirable results. Here, their independence is effectively lost. They hesitate to associate with those who were once their allies but are now seen as troublemakers by the government due to their unruly ideas. In their speeches, they talk about justice and truth, and although they consider the government's policy harmful, they still support it. When they can do nothing contrary to this, why should they invite dishonor by opposing it? In this situation, it is most prudent to protect oneself with grandiose words. And the greatest factor is that to speak or act against such noble, generous, and wise well-wishers would be to strangle humanity and good behavior. Oh, the car is here. Let's go, the people must be gathering at the business committee meeting. As they reached the venue, there was a round of applause. The chairman read out an address, the gist of which was that the government should protect those arts and crafts that are being wiped out due to foreign competition. For the commercial advancement of the nation, new factories should be opened, and when they succeed, they should be handed over to commercial institutions. It is also the government's duty to financially support those arts that are still in their infancy, to boost the people's enthusiasm. After thanking the chairman, Mr. Mehta announced the government's industrial policy, saying, "Your principles are flawless, but implementing them is extremely difficult. The government can provide guidance, but it is the people's job to take the lead in commercial activities. You must remember that even God helps those who help themselves. You lack self-confidence and industrial enthusiasm. Begging the government at every step is a sign of your incompetence and idleness." The next day, the newspapers began commenting on this speech. One group said, "Mr. Mehta's speech has clearly and skillfully outlined the government's policy." Another group wrote, "We were stunned after reading Mr. Mehta's speech. The business committee has taken the very path that Mr. Mehta himself showed. He has proven the adage true that, whatever enters the salt mine becomes salt." A third group wrote, "We fully agree with Mr. Mehta's principle that we should not beg the government humbly at every step. This speech will open the eyes of those who say we should send the most capable people to the council. We pity the members of the business committee who travelled all the way from Kanpur to Delhi to receive a lecture on self-confidence." It was the month of Chaitra, March to April. Shimla was already bustling. Mr. Mehta was in his study reading when Rajeshwari came and asked, "What are these letters?" "Mehta, this is the draft budget. It will be presented in the council next week. There are several items that I had doubts about before and still do. I don't know how to approve it. Look at this, 3 crore rupees have been set aside for increasing the salaries of high-ranking officials. Their salaries are already high. There is no need for this increase, but how can I bring this up? All those who will benefit from this are people I meet daily. Military expenses have increased by 20 crores. When our forces are sent to other countries, it is clear that they are more than we need, but if I oppose this item, the council will start pointing fingers at me." Rajeshwari, staying silent out of fear is not right. Then what was the point of you coming here? Mehta, it's easy to say, but hard to do. The respect and honor here are all about saying, "Yes, sir." If the viceroy so much as looks at me sideways, no one will even come near me. I'll become a pariah. Here comes Raja Bhadrabahadur Singh. Rajeshwari, Shivrajpur is a big estate. Mehta, yes, the annual income is no less than 15 lakhs, and it's an independent state. Rajeshwari, Raja Sahib seems very drawn to Manorama. It seems she is also starting to like him. Mehta, if this alliance happens, it would be wonderful. It's my position that is attracting Raja Sahib here. Such opportunities weren't available in Lucknow. Look, here comes the finance secretary, Mr. Cox. Cox, shaking hands with Mehta, "Mrs. Mehta, I am enamored with your attire. It's a pity our ladies don't wear saris." Rajeshwari, "I'm thinking of starting to wear a gown." Cox, "No, Mrs. Mehta, for God's sake, don't do that." Mr. Mehta, "I bring you some great news. Is your talented son coming here soon? Maharaja Bhind wants to make him his private secretary. You should inform him today." Mehta, "I'm very grateful to you." Cox, "It would be good to send a telegram. Have you read the Kabul report? His Majesty the Amir doesn't seem eager to make a treaty with us. He is leaning towards the Bolsheviks. The situation is worrying." Mehta, "I don't think so. In the past century, Kabul never dared to attack India. It was always India that took the initiative. Yes, they are skilled in defending themselves." Cox, "But forgive me, you forget that Iran, Afghanistan, and the Bolsheviks have made a pact. Isn't it worrying that so many enemies are gathering on our border? It's our duty to stay vigilant against them. By then, it was time for lunch. Everyone moved to the dining table. Discussions about horse racing and theatre seemed most interesting at that time. Mr. Mehta's remarks on the budget caused a stir across the country. One group considered his thoughts as divine words, another group agreed with most of his views but had some reservations, while a third group despaired over every word of the speech and wept for India's decline. They couldn't believe that these words had come from Mr. Mehta's mouth. I am astonished that the non-official members have unanimously opposed the part of the proposed expenditure on which the country's defense, peace, prosperity, and advancement depend. You consider educational reforms, health legislation, and the expansion of canals more important. You pay more attention to low-paid employees. I had more confidence in your political wisdom than this. The primary duty of the government is to protect the country from internal and external disruptive forces. Education and healthcare, industry, and business are secondary duties. We can see our entire population sinking in an ocean of ignorance, we can keep the whole country suffering from plague and malaria, we can make low-paid employees a prey to dire anxiety, and we can leave farmers at the mercy of the unpredictable nature, but we cannot tolerate an enemy standing on our border. Even if our entire revenue is dedicated to national defense, you should have no objection. You say there is no immediate threat of invasion. I say the world is governed by the impossible. Trains can fly, water can catch fire, trees can converse. The inanimate can become conscious. Don't these mysteries pass before our eyes every day? You say that politicians should not chase after possibilities but should solve the present and near future problems. I don't want to get into a debate about the duties of politicians, but everyone agrees that prevention is better than cure. Your duty is not just to support the government's military expenditure, but this objective should be presented by you. You will suggest that the volunteer army be increased. The government had a very disappointing experience with this in the recent Great War. The educated class is pleasure-loving, cowardly, and selfish. The rural people are peaceful, narrow-minded, I won't call them timid, and home-loving. Where is the self-sacrifice in them? Where is the bravery? Where is the valor of their ancestors? And perhaps I don't need to remind you that you cannot make a peace-loving people war-skilled and battle-hardened in just a few years. It was the month of Jeshtha, May to June, but there was neither the scorching heat of the plains nor the burning sunlight in Shimla. Mr. Mehta was opening his foreign letters. His face lit up when he saw Balakrishna's letter, but after reading it, his face turned gloomy. He took the letter to Rajeshwari. She asked eagerly, "Is there a letter from Bala?" Mehta: "Yes, here it is." Rajeshwari: "When is he coming?" Mehta: "He hasn't mentioned anything about coming or going. The whole letter is a lament about my betrayal of the nation and my degradation. In his eyes, I am the enemy of the nation, a cunning, selfish scoundrel, everything. I don't understand how his views have changed so much. I thought he was a very calm, serious, virtuous, and principled young man and I was proud of him. And yet, writing this letter wasn't enough for him, he published a detailed critique of my speech in a famous English magazine. It's a relief that he didn't write the article under his own name, otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to show my face anywhere. I don't know what kind of bad company he's been keeping. The job with Maharaja Bhind is slavery to him, the marriage of Manorama to Raja Bhadrabahadur Singh is disgraceful and insulting. He has the audacity to call me a cunning, deceitful, dishonest traitor. This humiliation. I don't want to see his face. Rajeshwari: "Let me see the letter." He wasn't so outspoken. She took the letter from her husband and read it from start to finish in a minute. Then she said, "Where are these harsh words? I don't see a single abusive word in this letter." Mehta: "Look at the sentiment, don't just focus on the words." Rajeshwari: "When there is a conflict between your ideals and his, how can he have reverence for you?" But Mr. Mehta was getting angrier. Rajeshwari's tolerant words only fueled his rage. He went to his office and began writing a letter to his son in the same anger, every word of which was sharper than a knife or a dagger. 2 weeks after the above incident, when Mr. Mehta opened the foreign mail, there was no letter from Balakrishna. He thought, my harsh words have had an effect, he's back on the right path, otherwise, he wouldn't have dared to respond. He tore open the London Times, a newspaper he read with great interest, and started reading the news. Suddenly, a gasp escaped his lips. The newspaper fell from his hands. The first news item read: a gathering of Indian patriots in London, dissatisfaction with the Honourable Mr. Mehta's speech, Mr. Balakrishna Mehta's protest and suicide. Last Saturday, a large meeting of Indian youths and leaders was held at Baxton Hall. The chairman, Mr. Talibia, said, even after much searching, we cannot find such piercing, such harsh words in the speech of any English member of the council. We have never heard such misleading, such reckless thoughts from the mouth of any politician. This speech has shown that if there is any remedy for India's salvation, it is self-rule, which means complete freedom of mind and speech. If we had not lost faith in gradual progress, evolution, until now, we have now lost it. Our disease has become incurable. It cannot be cured with powders and concoctions. To get rid of it, we need a complete transformation. High government positions do not make us free, rather, they strengthen our spiritual slavery. We believe that the Honourable Mr. Mehta considers the ideas he has presented to be false in his heart, but the desire for honour, the love of glory, and the attachment to office have forced him to strangle his soul. Someone shouted, "This is a false accusation." People looked around in surprise and saw Mr. Balakrishna standing in his place. His body was trembling with anger. He wanted to speak, but people surrounded him and began to condemn and insult him. The chairman had great difficulty in calming the people, but Mr. Balakrishna left the place and walked away. The next day, when friends went to meet Balakrishna, they found his body lying on the floor. 2 bullets had pierced his chest. His diary lay open on the table, with these lines written on it. Today, my pride was crushed in the meeting. I cannot bear this humiliation. I will have to witness many more such disgraceful scenes against my revered father. It is better to end this ideal conflict. Perhaps my life is an obstacle to his chosen path. May God give me strength.
This story was originally written by Premchand, a legendary author of Hindi literature almost 100 years ago. Do let us know if you like the story. If it so happens that you did not like the story, even then, please let us know your choice so that we can find something you would like to listen. If you like the story, tell your friends as well. If you want to enjoy more stories like these from so many other Indian authors, subscribing the channel would make it easy. Bye for now.